Hello, and I want to welcome you to this discussion on the rectangular coordinate system. Today we're just going to get a familiarization with what the rectangular coordinate system is, what it looks like, finding some points along with the quadrants they are found in, and talk about the origin. Let's get started. So typically in the past you have probably made number lines that look like this, where you did something like 0, 1, 2, and on the left side of the 0 you did a -1 and a -2. Well, did you also think about flipping it to where it would look like 0 near the center, and if we're going in the positive direction, we'll make that the up, making that a 1, a 2, a 3, and then below the 0 making it go in the downward direction, the negative direction, -1, -2, -3, something like that. Well, and since this is horizontal and we're used to seeing it look like a regular number line, let's refer to that as x. So every value would be an x value. And if this is vertical, why don't we call it something else? Call it y. And what if we were to move the horizontal axis over to the vertical axis, dropping the 0 on top of the 0 on this axis? We get something that looked a lot like the rectangular coordinate system. In fact, we get the coordinate system. We get something that looked like this, where this was the intersection between the two lines. We call this the x-axis. That's the horizontal line. And we call this up here the y-axis. This is the vertical line. Okay, so we can see that each of these are broken into 4 pieces. There's a piece, there's a piece, there's a third piece, and there's a fourth piece. So let's go through and label what these are called so they can familiarize and be able to name what these are when asked. So this first part right here, let's refer to this as quadrant 1. And usually people write these as Roman numerals. So quadrant 1. To the left of it, let's call this quadrant 2. Oops. Excuse me for that goof up there. It's supposed to say quadrant 2. Quadrant 2. We're moving in a counterclockwise motion, naming these. As you might guess, this third block is quadrant 3. And finally, moving in the counterclockwise motion, and as you may guess, this is quadrant 4. And that is an IV with little hats on top and bottom to denote 4. Since we know a little bit more about this, let's think about how we listed above. Where numbers to the right of the 0 for the horizontal were positive, to the left negative, and using the vertical scale, above the 0 were positive, and below the 0 were negative. And if we put together and actually use nice looking grids to denote numbers, we're going to get something that looks like this. Where quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. Here's the one from the x-axis, here's the one from the y-axis. And what we can do is make coordinate pairs matching where these intersections are. Here's the point 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6, and it can continue on infinitely many times. Okay, so a coordinate pair is going to consist of 2 things in parentheses separated by a comma. The first value that we read will be the x value, and the second will be the y value. Just as we discussed before, x values are going to be found horizontally on this axis, while y values will be the vertical numbers, the numbers found on this axis. So if we were, for example, to ask to find some points, let's plot some points. So just if we raise this up and see the full page, and let me focus. Okay, so the first point here, 2, 4. That means x is 2, y is 4. So we have to do, since we're working first with 2, which is the x value, find 2 for the x's. There it is, the horizontal value. Now what we do is find the y value, which is 4. Remember, we're looking for the vertical scale this time since we have the x value down. We found 4 to be right here. So what we do is have our fingers meet, and they meet right here at this point. So all we did was guide our fingers along until we met where 2, 4 met, which is this point right here on the grid. Okay, and if we look, what quadrant is that in? Well, if we refer back to our note, quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Refer back, this red dot is in quadrant 1. So up here we'll write quadrant 1. Okay, now we're asked to find 3, -2. So that means locate 3 on the x scale. Remember, x scale is horizontal, so we go across, here is 0, and we're looking for the positive side, there it is. Okay, now it says to find -2 on the y scale. Remember, here is 0, so we're going to go down for the negatives. Here's -2. So let's just let our fingers meet where they cross, and that is the point 3, -2, because we went right 3 places like it says, and it says to go down 2, or find -2 and find where the 2 places meet. And if we look, it's quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, finally the point is in quadrant 4. Okay, moving on, it says to find the point -1, -3. -1 is x, -3 is y. So that means find -1 for the x values. It's right here because it's on the horizontal line. Now it says find the -3 from the y values. This is right here because we went below the 0 to find the negatives. And now we're just finding where the 2 points meet. -1 goes down and it meets the -3 right here. This is the point we are looking for, and as you might have guessed, 1, 2, 3, quadrant 3. Okay, let's look at the points 1, -2. That means find y on the x values, -2 on the y's. So first we start off at the starting point of 0. We found 1 for the x values. Now we have to find -2 on the x scale, or the y scale, excuse me, because y is -2. We found it, so let's just let our fingers meet. And right there is where the points meet. And if we look, that will be quadrant 4. Okay, the next one is point 1, 1. What we're doing for this point is finding when x is 1 and y is 1. So we go starting with x, we found 1, we have the 1 for y, which let our points meet, and there's the point 1, 1. Using our rules and our knowledge now, we know that will be in quadrant 1. Okay, our next point we're going to look for is -4, 2. Okay, negative 4 on the x scale. We're going to look for the negative side, which is right here. Negative 4 is located right there on the scale. Now it says to find positive 2 on the y scale. And we move in the vertical direction upward to find a positive 2. We have our two fingers pointed where they need to be. Now let's just let them meet. So right here is where the fingers met to find the point negative 4, 2. And what quadrant can that be found in? That will be in quadrant 2. We have two more points to look for. Now let's look for those. We have negative 4, 0. Okay, negative 4, our starting point is 0, 0, so our first point is a negative 4. So let's move in the negative direction to find the x. It's negative 4 and 0 on the y direction. If we look, there's 1, so this line right here must be the 0 for y. So this point right here is the point we're in search of. And now we have to ask ourselves, what quadrant is that found in? Is that, you could either look at it and say, well, I think it could be in quadrant 2 or it could be in quadrant 3. Actually, what we're going to say is that this is going to be located on the x-axis. That's the location of it. It's not a quadrant at all. Okay, and finally, one of the most important points of all that we can look at is 0, 0. It is our starting point when we go looking for different points on the 4-quadrant rectangular coordinate system. And as you might have guessed, we start here. We do not move side to side for the negatives or positives because we are at 0. And we do not move up or down for the y's because we are at 0. This is the origin. This is where the negatives and positives meet for both the x and y direction. And what do we refer to this as? Well, we just called it the origin. There are infinitely many points you can plot on an XY coordinate plane, and in higher mathematics they keep adding more planes to this. You get many dimensions, and this is a very nice field of mathematics to look at, and it only builds on itself. And in part 2 of this video we will analyze some other things you can do with this, including lines and more dots and a lot more fun with mathematics.